Okay, when you hear the name Salvador Dalí, I bet one image just kind of melts into your mind, right? The drooping, dreamlike clocks. But here's the thing. The guy behind that famous painting, he was maybe even more surreal than his art. So let's peel back the layers and get into the mind of a true master. So let's kick things off with a pretty weird question. What on earth connects surreal art to a piece of melting cheese? Yeah, I know it sounds totally bizarre, but trust me, the answer to that question is the key to understanding how Dalí's incredible mind actually worked.
All right, Section 1, Master of the Surreal. This is all about how he was able to transform dreams and his subconscious into actual reality on a canvas. See, to really get Dalí, you have to get Surrealism. And he wasn't just in the movement, he was its undisputed king. His whole mission, really, was to reach into that weird world of dreams and nightmares, pull out the most impossible things, and then paint them so realistically that you just couldn't look away.
And that, of course, brings us to his absolute masterpiece, The Persistence of Memory. You know this one. I mean, everyone does. Those soft, melting clocks are probably one of the most famous images in the history of art. They feel like they were just ripped straight out of some bizarre dream, which, it turns out, they kind of were. So the real question is, how did he actually do that? How did he come up with this stuff?
Which leads us perfectly into our next section, the method to his madness. We're going to reveal the secrets behind his strange visions. Because here's the thing you have to understand. Dalí's visions weren't just random chaos. Not at all. He had a very specific process for conjuring them up. He basically developed a system for looking at the totally normal world around him and twisting it into something, well, something extraordinary.
So let's go back to that melting cheese I mentioned. You ready for this? The incredible truth, the inspiration for those iconic melting clocks, was a wheel of camembert cheese. Literally, just a wheel of cheese melting in the sun. And that right there is a perfect example of his genius, right? Taking a totally normal, everyday thing and turning it into this profound symbol for how soft and fluid time can be. Of course, he had to give this technique a very grand, very Dalí-esque name, the paranoiac critical method. Sounds complicated, I know, but the idea behind it was actually pretty simple. It was his personal key to unlock his own subconscious. It was a way to deliberately force his brain to make these bizarre connections that your normal, rational mind would just completely ignore. So how did it actually work in practice? Well, here's the breakdown. Step 1. He'd get himself into that weird state right between being awake and being asleep. You know that drowsy feeling? That's what he was after. Then, step 2. In that hazy state, he would actively misinterpret the world around him. So a melting cheese wheel suddenly becomes a melting clock. And finally, step 3, and this was crucial, he would rush to get that irrational vision down on the canvas before his logical brain could wake up and go, wait a minute, that's just silly. Okay, moving on to the man behind the mustache. Here we'll look at the key people and things that really shaped who he was, because, you know, Dalí's art was really only half the story. His public persona, that was a masterpiece all on its own. He was a character, and that character was just as surreal and, importantly, just as deliberately crafted as any of his paintings.
And you can't talk about the man without talking about the mustache. I mean, come on, it was his signature, his trademark. But for Dalí, it was way more than just for show. He famously said his mustache worked like antennas for art and inspiration. He actually believed it was pulling creative ideas right out of thin air.
But as important as those mustache antennas were, he had an even more powerful one, and that was his wife, Gala. Look, it is absolutely impossible to understand Dalí without understanding her. She wasn't just a part of his life, she was the absolute center of his entire universe.
And Gala, she really had two very different but equally crucial sides to her. On one hand, she was his ultimate muse. I mean, she's in so many of his paintings. He felt she was so essential to his arc that he would often sign his paintings Gala Salvador Dalí. Think about that. But then, on the other hand, she was this brilliant, tough-as-nails business manager. She was the one handling his career, negotiating these huge deals, and really driving the financial success that turned him into a global brand.
Which brings us to crafting an unforgettable brand. And this subtitle says it all. He didn't just create art, he turned himself into art. And you know, that success we just talked about, it was no accident. Dalí understood something way ahead of his time that a lot of other artists just didn't get. To be a huge artist, you also had to be a huge brand. He didn't just paint, he carefully built this public persona until he became a living, breathing work of art himself. And his brand strategy was just audacious.
I mean, he took this weird, niche thing, surrealism, and made it mainstream by working with Hollywood giants like Alfred Hitchcock and even Walt Disney. He was completely open about his love of money, arguing, hey, if I'm a genius, I should get paid like one. He loved to shock people on purpose, too. There was this one time he showed up to give a lecture in a full deep-sea diving suit and almost suffocated, for real. But it all came down to one core belief. For an artist, the absolute worst thing you can be is forgettable.
So, all of this brings us to the big one, genius or madman. This is the ultimate question about his whole carefully crafted persona. When you add it all up, the bizarre behavior, the wild statements, the mustache, it all leads to the one question that followed him his entire life. Was this guy a true artistic genius, or was he just plain crazy?
I mean, really, was Salvador Dalí simply mad? It's the question that just hangs over his entire legacy, right? When you look at his strange life and his incredible, fantastical art, you just have to wonder, was this the work of an actual madman?
Well, why don't we let the man himself answer that one? Dalí famously said, "The difference between me and a madman is that I am not mad." And that says it all. He was always in control. He was a master performer who knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. The madness? That was just a tool. It was his brand, but it was never, ever his reality.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. Dalí's entire life was basically a performance, with a single goal, to be absolutely unforgettable. And he proved that sometimes the line between genius and madness isn't really a line at all. It's a stage, which kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? In any field, not just art, what does it really take to become unforgettable?